Emma had grown used to quiet days. Her husband Daniel worked long hours in Portland, and most evenings she ate alone in their small but warm house on the edge of town. She loved the house, with its tall windows and white curtains, but lately it felt too silent, too empty. Marriage hadn't been what she once dreamed of. Daniel was kind, yes, but his kindness often came with distance. He provided. He worked hard. But when he came home, his eyes were always tired, and his words carried the weight of distraction. Emma often felt like she lived beside him, not with him. On that particular afternoon, the house smelled faintly of chamomile tea. Emma stood in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug, staring out the window at the drizzle falling steadily against the glass. She wasn't expecting anyone. The stillness of the house was broken only by the soft hum of the refrigerator. Then she heard it, the creak of the front door slowly opening. Her heart jumped. For a moment, she thought Daniel must have come home early, but that idea vanished quickly. Daniel never came home before dark. When she turned, she froze. Standing in the doorway, shaking off the light rain from his coat, was her father-in-law, Richard. "Richard?" she said, surprised, though her voice softened out of respect. He smiled, holding up a paper bag. "I brought you some groceries. Thought I'd save you a trip to the store." Emma blinked, half relieved and half caught off guard. Richard had a habit of dropping by unannounced, but this time felt different. She hadn't even heard a knock. "You should have called," she said gently, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I know," he replied, stepping inside with careful movements. "I thought I'd surprise you." He placed the bag on the counter. Apples rolled slightly within the bag, and the faint smell of bread drifted out. Emma wasn't sure if she was more touched or unsettled. She respected Richard. At 58, he was the kind of man who carried himself with quiet dignity. His silver hair only added to the wisdom in his face, and his calm way of speaking always put people at ease. Unlike Daniel, who rushed through life, Richard noticed things, small things. Emma poured him a cup of tea, the same she had been drinking, and they sat together at the dining table. Richard looked around the house, then let his gaze rest on her. "It feels lonely in here," he said softly. The words sank into her chest. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. "It's quiet, yes, but I don't mind." He tilted his head, studying her carefully. "Emma," he said in that calm, steady voice, "you've lost your smile." Her breath caught. She had never spoken her loneliness aloud, not even to Daniel. She lived her days covering it with polite smiles and small talk. But in a single sentence, Richard had seen through her. His words felt like a mirror she wasn't ready to face. She looked away, staring at her mug, tracing the rim with her finger. For a long moment, she said nothing. Finally, almost in a whisper, she admitted, "Sometimes I feel invisible." When she lifted her eyes, Richard wasn't judging her. He wasn't shocked. His expression was full of quiet empathy. "You're not invisible," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Not to me." The room went still. Emma's heart beat faster, her chest tight. She knew he didn't mean it in a way that crossed any lines, but still, his words held weight. They felt like sunlight reaching through a window she had kept closed for too long. She opened her mouth to reply, to change the subject, to laugh it off, but nothing came. The clock on the wall ticked louder, filling the silence. The groceries sat untouched on the counter, the smell of bread still faint in the air, but Emma felt as though the whole world had shifted. When Richard finally leaned back, the spell broke. He sipped his tea, his face calm again, but Emma couldn't shake what he had said. That night, after he left, and the house fell back into its stillness, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Daniel hadn't called to say goodnight. The silence pressed in, heavier than ever, and all she could hear over and over were Richard's words. "You're not invisible. Not to me." For the first time in months, Emma allowed herself to wonder if life had just opened a door she wasn't ready to walk through. The morning after Richard's unexpected visit, Emma tried to carry on as usual. She folded laundry, wiped the counters, and answered emails for her part-time job. But her mind kept circling back to his words. "You've lost your smile. You're not invisible." They echoed like whispers she couldn't quiet. Daniel had left early, as he always did, with barely a goodbye. She tried not to let it bother her. She told herself she had chosen this life, that Daniel's hard work was for their future, but deep inside, she longed for someone who noticed her now. 3 days later, the sound of tires crunching on gravel pulled her from her thoughts. She glanced out the window and saw Richard's car. Her heart skipped. She told herself it was nothing. He often checked in. Still, she smoothed her hair in the reflection of the glass before opening the door. "Richard?" she said, surprised. "Back again?" He lifted a small box. "Brought some tools. Thought I'd take a look at that squeaky back door hinge you mentioned." Emma hadn't thought much about the hinge, but she let him in. Soon the familiar sound of his steady footsteps filled the house. She made tea while he worked, and when he returned to the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up and his hair slightly mussed, she caught herself smiling. They sat down at the table again, as if it had become routine. Richard's hands wrapped around his cup, his fingers strong but calm. He watched her with eyes that seemed to notice more than she wanted to reveal. "You look tired," he said gently. Emma gave a weak laugh. "I suppose I am. Daniel's been so busy. I've been handling everything at home alone. Sometimes I feel like I'm the only one here." Richard nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "You deserve better than silence." His words struck something deep. She hadn't planned on opening up, but once she started, the truth tumbled out. She told him about Daniel's late nights, the dinners that went cold on the table, the conversations that ended before they began. She admitted she felt like her marriage was turning into a shadow of what it once was. "I don't mean to complain," she finished quickly, embarrassed by how much she had revealed. "He works hard. I should be grateful." Richard shook his head firmly. "Gratefulness shouldn't mean losing yourself. Marriage is about being seen, not just being provided for." Emma looked at him, startled by his certainty. No one had ever told her that before. Daniel's family had always praised his dedication to work, his drive, his ambition. No one ever questioned whether Emma felt lonely in the process. She swallowed hard. "Sometimes I wonder if he even notices me anymore." Richard's gaze softened. "I notice you." The words hung in the air. Neither of them moved, yet Emma felt the world tilt slightly, as if they were standing at the edge of something neither dared name. Her heart thudded loudly, and she looked down at her hands to break the intensity of the moment. "Richard," she whispered. "We shouldn't talk like this," he exhaled, nodding slowly, regret flickering in his eyes. "You're right. I didn't mean to cross a line. I hate to see you fading when I know you're meant to shine." Emma bit her lip, trying to steady herself. She had never expected this. His honesty, his tenderness, his courage to say what no one else dared. She wanted to be angry at him, but all she felt was the sting of truth. The clock on the wall chimed, startling them both. Emma rose quickly, collecting the cups, needing to move to break the tension. Richard stood too, hesitating as if unsure whether to leave or stay. "I'll go," he said finally, his voice low. "Didn't mean to cause you worry." As he walked to the door, Emma's heart ached in a way she didn't understand. She wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, but her tongue felt heavy. When the door closed behind him, the silence of the house returned, but it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the ordinary quiet of a lonely home. It was the charged silence of something unsaid, something waiting. That night, Emma lay awake again. Daniel had texted a short apology for working late, promising to make it up to her over the weekend. She stared at the glowing words on her phone, but they felt hollow. Her mind drifted back to Richard's steady gaze, his words, his certainty that she was worth being seen. For the first time, Emma asked herself a question she had avoided for years. What if she wanted more than what she had? She turned onto her side, hugging the pillow, the sound of the clock filling the room. She knew she was standing on a dangerous edge, but she couldn't deny the truth. Richard had spoken to her heart in a way Daniel hadn't in years. Emma closed her eyes, whispering to herself that she wouldn't let this go further, that it was just a conversation. But deep down, she already knew this was no ordinary moment. Something had shifted, and no matter how hard she tried to ignore it, life would never be the same again. The days that followed carried an uneasiness Emma couldn't shake. Richard's words had planted something inside her, a truth she couldn't ignore. She kept telling herself their conversation was harmless, that he had only spoken from concern. But every time she thought of his voice saying, "I notice you," her chest tightened with something dangerously close to longing. Daniel had been away more than usual, stuck in meetings and late-night deadlines. Emma had grown used to empty dinners and cold sheets, but now the silence felt different. It wasn't just loneliness, it was awareness. Awareness that someone else saw her, awareness that she was no longer invisible. On a Thursday evening, rain fell hard against the windows. Emma sat curled on the couch with a blanket, the sound of thunder rolling in the distance. She had prepared a meal earlier, but Daniel had called to say he wouldn't be home again. His voice on the phone had been hurried, distracted, almost dismissive. When he hung up, she sat staring at the untouched plates, her heart heavy. She was still sitting there when the knock came. Not the creak of the door this time, an actual knock. She rose slowly, her feet heavy against the wooden floor. When she opened the door, Richard stood there, umbrella in one hand, a worried look in his eyes. "You're alone again," he said softly. Almost like a statement, more than a question. Emma nodded, stepping aside to let him in. His coat smelled faintly of rain, and when he shook it off, the air between them felt charged, like the storm outside had followed him in. "I was driving back from town," he explained, "and I thought of you. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Emma's throat tightened. She didn't know if it was wrong to feel comforted, but she did. They sat together in the living room, the lamp casting a warm glow against the storm's shadows. For a moment, neither spoke, just listened to the rain. Finally, Richard broke the silence. "Emma, you shouldn't have to sit in a house this quiet. You're too young to be this sad." His words cracked something inside her. She tried to laugh, to brush it off, but her voice shook. "I don't want to complain. Daniel works hard. I know he's doing it for us." Richard shook his head. "Working hard shouldn't mean leaving you behind. A marriage should make you feel whole, not hollow." Her eyes burned, and before she could stop herself, the truth spilled out. She told him everything. The nights she cried alone. The dinners that went cold. The way she had started to feel like a ghost in her own home. Her voice trembled as she admitted she sometimes wondered if Daniel still saw her at all. Richard didn't interrupt. He sat with his hands folded, his gaze steady, his silence giving her permission to keep going. By the time she finished, tears had streaked her cheeks. She felt both ashamed and relieved, like she had finally opened a door that had been locked for years. When she looked at him, expecting pity, she saw only understanding. His voice was low, calm, and filled with weight. "Emma, you are worth so much more than neglect. You deserve to be loved every day, not only in promises of tomorrow." The thunder outside echoed his words. Emma's heart pounded as if it were trying to escape her chest. She shouldn't be hearing this, not from him. But at the same time, no one had ever spoken to her like this. Not Daniel, not anyone. Her lips parted, but she didn't know what to say. The air between them felt too full, too heavy. Richard's hand shifted slightly, resting close to hers on the couch cushion. He didn't touch her, but the nearness of his hand made her pulse race. She thought of Daniel then, of the vows they had made, of the years they had shared. But she also thought of the silence, the emptiness, the way she had been fading away piece by piece. She had wanted someone to notice, to care, to remind her that she was still alive. And here Richard was, saying exactly what she had longed to hear. Her tears spilled again, but this time they weren't only of sadness. They were of confusion, of longing, of the dangerous truth that she wanted more of this closeness, even though she knew she shouldn't. Richard's voice softened further. "I wish my son could see you the way I do. You're remarkable, Emma, and you shouldn't have to beg to be seen." The words landed like thunder inside her. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She turned her face away, afraid he'd see everything in her eyes, afraid she'd see it in his too. They sat in silence, the storm raging outside, the air thick with things unspoken. When Richard finally rose to leave, his movements were slow, reluctant, as if he didn't want to break the fragile thread between them. "I'm sorry," he murmured near the door. "I didn't mean to say too much. I care about you, Emma." Her chest ached at the simplicity of his confession. She wanted to stop him, to ask him to stay, to tell him she felt it too, but fear held her back. Instead, she only nodded, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for listening." When the door closed, Emma sank back onto the couch, her hands trembling. She stared at the rain streaming down the window, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She had spoken aloud the secrets she had buried for years. She had let someone else, someone she shouldn't, see her brokenness. And instead of turning away, he had held it with tenderness. That night, lying awake once more in the cold bed, Emma knew there was no going back. Something had shifted beyond repair. She told herself it was just words, just comfort in a storm. But deep down, she knew it was more. She knew her heart had started to reach for something forbidden, and that realization left her shaken. Because for the first time, Emma wasn't sure if she could stop it from going further. The days after the storm were filled with silence that wasn't ordinary. Emma moved through her home with a heaviness she couldn't shake. She had said too much to Richard, revealed too many truths, and his words echoed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. "You deserve to be loved every day." Daniel noticed nothing. He came and went, his phone always in hand, his mind somewhere else. Emma tried to tell herself that her heart was still loyal, that she could swallow the feeling stirring inside her. But it was like trying to hold back a tide with bare hands. One Saturday morning, Daniel announced he had to leave for another business trip. He spoke quickly, not even looking up from his suitcase. Emma stood in the doorway watching him pack, wondering when their life had turned into this, him chasing deadlines, her chasing memories. "Don't wait up for me," he said, zipping his bag. "I'll be gone 3 nights." She nodded, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. He kissed her cheek absently, like a habit, then was gone. The sound of the door shutting was final, like a seal on the life she had been trying to endure. Hours later, the doorbell rang. Emma's heart stumbled in her chest when she saw Richard standing there, holding a small bag of groceries. "Thought you might need these," he said gently. His voice carried no assumptions, only quiet care. She hesitated but let him in. They moved around the kitchen together, putting things away, the air thick with the unspoken memory of their last conversation. At one point, their hands brushed against each other, reaching for a glass, and Emma pulled back quickly, her cheeks warming. Richard noticed but said nothing. Instead, he made coffee, and they sat at the table like two people trying to pretend things were normal. But nothing was normal anymore. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "You shouldn't keep coming here. People will talk." "Daniel," Richard cut her off, his tone calm but firm. "Emma, I don't care what people say. I only care about how you're living. And right now, you're not living at all. You're waiting." Her throat tightened. "It isn't that simple. He's my husband. I made vows. And he made the same vows," Richard said softly. "But Emma, look at what you've been given in return. Loneliness. Silence. A life where you doubt yourself every day." His words struck deep. She wanted to deny it, to defend Daniel. But the truth was right there, raw and undeniable. She stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap, unable to look at him. Richard leaned closer, his voice gentler now. "I'm not asking you for anything. I just need you to know, you don't deserve to be invisible. Not to me, not to anyone." Emma's chest ached. She wanted to be strong, but the weight of everything she had been carrying poured out of her eyes. Tears slipped down, and before she could stop herself, Richard reached across the table and took her hand. The touch was light, careful, but it set her entire body trembling. She didn't pull away. For the first time in years, someone's hand felt like safety. "Richard," she whispered, her voice breaking. "This is wrong," he shook his head slowly. "What's wrong is a woman feeling unloved in her own marriage." The words hung in the air like lightning. Emma's heart pounded as the silence between them grew heavier, more charged than it had ever been. She pulled her hand back, standing quickly as if distance could save her. "I need some air," she said, stepping onto the porch. The afternoon sun was bright, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside her. She heard Richard follow, his footsteps slow, careful. He stopped a few feet away, giving her space, his voice steady. "I don't want to hurt you, Emma, but I also can't pretend I don't feel what I feel." Her breath caught. She turned to him, eyes wide. "You shouldn't say that." "I have to," he replied, his tone firm but vulnerable. "Because it's the truth. I see you, Emma, every part of you, and I can't stand by and watch you fade away." The air between them was electric. Emma felt her world tilt, torn between loyalty to Daniel and the undeniable pull toward the man standing before her. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her mind racing with everything she knew and everything she wanted but was afraid to admit. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of her own conflict. Richard's eyes softened. "Then don't decide right now, just let yourself feel that you matter. Because you do, more than you think." For a long moment, neither moved. The wind rustled the trees, carrying with it the sound of two hearts caught in something they couldn't escape. Emma wanted to step forward, to close the gap, but she froze. She knew one step would change everything forever. Instead, she turned back to the door, her hands trembling. "You should go, Richard." His jaw tightened, but he nodded slowly. "If that's what you want." When he left, Emma leaned against the wall, her chest rising and falling in sharp breaths. She felt like she had just walked through fire and come out burned but alive. That night, she couldn't sleep. Daniel's absence felt heavier than ever, and Richard's words haunted her. "I see you. I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel." Emma lay awake, realizing she stood at the edge of something dangerous, but undeniable. She could keep pretending, keep burying the loneliness under forced smiles, or she could admit that her heart had already begun to wander. The thought terrified her. But what terrified her more was the truth that she no longer felt empty. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The following morning, Emma moved through the house like a shadow. She brewed coffee she didn't drink, opened windows she didn't notice, and tried to silence the echo of Richard's voice in her head. His words had taken root, and no matter how hard she pushed them away, they kept returning. Reminders that she had not felt truly seen in years. Daniel came home earlier than expected, his suitcase thumping against the floor as he walked inside. He looked tired, but not in the way a man should look after traveling for work. He looked distant, almost irritated to be home at all. "Hey," Emma greeted softly, forcing a smile. "Hey," he replied, setting his bag down. He kissed her cheek, quick and distracted, then pulled out his laptop before even unpacking. Emma stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at him, realizing how much of her life had been reduced to moments like this, cold gestures dressed as affection. She wanted to speak, to tell him about the hollow ache inside her, but she knew he would brush it off. He always did, and maybe once, years ago, she would have stayed silent to keep the peace, but not anymore. That evening, while Daniel tapped away at his emails, Emma finally said, "We need to talk." He glanced up, brows furrowed. "About what?" "About us." The words hung heavy in the room. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, then leaned back in his chair. "Emma, I don't have time for one of your moods. I'm buried in work." Her chest tightened. "It's not a mood, Daniel. It's our marriage. I can't keep pretending we're fine when we're not." His eyes narrowed. "Where is this coming from?" Her hands trembled, but she steadied her voice. "It's coming from years of being invisible. From feeling like I don't matter to you anymore." Daniel sighed loudly, running a hand through his hair. "Emma, we've been married a long time. Things change. You can't expect it to feel like the beginning forever." "I don't expect that," she said quickly, her voice breaking. "I just want to feel like I still matter. That I'm more than someone who cooks and keeps the house running while you live in another world." For a moment, Daniel looked at her, almost as if he wanted to argue. But then he shrugged. This is life, Emma. People grow apart. It doesn't mean I don't love you. Her heart sank. That was the problem. He said the word love, but there was no weight behind it, no warmth. It was just a phrase he used to keep the structure of their marriage standing, even if the foundation had already cracked. That night, Emma lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The distance between their bodies in bed felt like miles. She thought of Richard again, of his steady eyes, of his words, of the way he made her feel seen. It was wrong to think of him, she knew, but it was impossible not to. The next afternoon, Richard showed up again. He knocked softly, almost as if unsure if he should even be there. Emma opened the door, her chest tightening. "You look tired," he said gently. She gave a small laugh, though it carried no joy. "That's because I am." He stepped inside, hesitated, then asked, "Did you talk to him?" Emma nodded. "I did. It didn't change anything." Richard's jaw clenched, his eyes filled with a sadness she recognized. He wanted to reach for her, to hold her, but he didn't. Instead, he said, "Then you need to decide what will make you whole again." The simplicity of the statement startled her. What will make me whole again? It wasn't about choosing between two men. It wasn't about loyalty to a vow that had already lost its meaning. It was about herself, her heart, her life, her happiness. The days that followed were a blur of quiet storms inside her. She cooked meals Daniel barely touched, cleaned rooms he never noticed, and replayed Richard's words in her mind. She was at a crossroads, and every hour she spent hesitating only deepened the ache. One evening, Daniel announced he would be leaving for another trip. Emma stared at him, her heart suddenly calm in its clarity. She realized she could not live another day in a house filled with silence. When he finished packing, she stood by the door. "Daniel," she said softly, "I think we need to take a break." He froze, turning slowly. "What are you talking about? I mean, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living in a marriage where I don't exist." His face hardened. "So that's it? You're giving up?" Tears filled her eyes, but her voice stayed steady. "No, Daniel. I gave everything for years. What I'm doing now is finally choosing myself." For once, Daniel had no response. He looked at her like he didn't recognize her, then turned and walked out. The door shut behind him, with a finality that shook the walls of the house. Emma stood there, her body trembling, but inside she felt something she hadn't in years. Peace. Later that night, when Richard came by, he found her sitting on the porch, staring at the stars. She looked at him, her face streaked with tears, but also carrying a quiet strength. "I told him," she whispered. Richard's eyes softened. He sat beside her without a word, letting the silence between them breathe. Finally, she turned to him, her voice fragile but sure. "I don't know what happens next. I just know I can't go back to what I was." Richard reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. "You don't have to go back. You only have to move forward, and you won't be alone." Emma's chest ached, but not from pain, from relief. She let herself lean against him, not as someone broken, but as someone choosing to live again. For the first time in a long time, she felt whole. And so Emma's silence finally broke, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the simple courage to choose herself. It was the ending of one life, and the beginning of another, one she had almost forgotten she deserved.